I remember that moment clearly. Not when I realized the piano was gone. Not when my father said he sold it for $95,000, like it was just another object in storage. But the moment my grandmother heard everything. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask a single question. She just stayed silent for a few seconds, reached for her phone, dialed a number, and said 7 words. 7 words that would unravel everything my parents thought they controlled. My name is Olivia Carter. I am 28 years old, a piano teacher, and for most of my life, I have been the one who stood in the background of my own family. Not because I was less capable, but because I was never the chosen one. My younger sister Chloe was always the center, the future, the investment that made sense, and me, I was the backup, the one who could manage, the one who could be sacrificed without too much guilt. I got used to it. Used to being left out of conversations. Used to decisions being made without me. Used to hearing my mother say things like, "At least I was useful for taking care of my grandmother," as if that was something to be grateful for. And I accepted it. Until the day my grandmother was hospitalized. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon right after my last class ended. My father told me she had another heart attack, that she was stable but would be moved into end-of-life care. There would be a family meeting in an hour. That was all. I dropped everything and went to the hospital. When I arrived, they were already there, standing together, speaking quietly, as if this were a business discussion, instead of a moment when someone's life was nearing its end. My father stood with his arms crossed. My mother held onto her handbag. Chloe was scrolling through her phone. No one asked if I was okay. No one even really looked at me. My father acknowledged my arrival, like I had just joined a meeting late. Then he said they needed to divide responsibilities. Not how I felt, not what I needed, just responsibility. Someone had to visit my grandmother every day. He and my mother were busy. Chloe was in an important stage with her boyfriend's family. Important in our house always meant money, status, opportunity. Then he looked at me and told me I would handle it. Not asked. Assigned. He said my schedule was flexible, that teaching music didn't require overtime, as if my time didn't carry weight, as if my work didn't matter. I wanted to respond. I wanted to tell him about the 30 students I taught every week, the extra programs I managed, the hours I spent building something of my own. But I didn't. I said yes. Softly, automatically. Because at that moment I still believed that staying quiet was easier. What I didn't know was that 2 weeks later they would take the one thing my grandmother had left for me and turn it into something else. Something for Chloe. And I didn't know that this time I wouldn't stay silent. I thought everything would stop there. At the hospital. At the way they divided responsibilities like a checklist. At the fact that I was the only one walking into my grandmother's room while they stayed outside, continuing conversations that somehow felt more important. But I was wrong. Because in my family, unfairness was never just a moment. It was a system. Something that existed quietly for so many years that you stopped noticing it. My grandmother's room was at the end of the hallway. Soft light, the familiar scent of lavender, and a strange sense of peace that didn't match anything outside. When she saw me, she smiled, not like someone who was fading, but like someone still watching everything clearly. She said I was the only one who always came early. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That had always been my role. The one who showed up. In ordinary days, in difficult moments, in the things no one else wanted to handle, and still somehow never the one who mattered. Then she asked me something simple. If I was tired. It stopped me. Not because it was a difficult question, but because no one had asked me that in a long time. I almost said no, out of habit, but this time I didn't. I told her yes. She didn't respond with words. She just held my hand a little tighter, and that was enough. For the first time that day, I felt seen. The days that followed became routine. I visited her every day, before work, after work, sometimes even canceling classes just to stay longer. No one asked me to do it. No one acknowledged it, but I still did. Because I wanted to. And because if I didn't, no one else would. Meanwhile, everything outside continued as if nothing had changed, maybe even better than before. One evening, as I left the hospital, my phone vibrated. A message from my mother. Chloe was having dinner with the Harrison family and needed to make a good impression. The Harrison family again. A name that had become more important than anything else in our house. Not just a relationship, but an opportunity. I didn't reply. A few minutes later, my mother called. She asked if I could stop by my grandmother's house and pick up some clothes. She said she was busy. Bosu. I looked at my hands, still carrying the faint smell of antiseptic. I told her I had just left the hospital. She said I was closer, and that I had time. Time. In my family, that word meant my time didn't matter. I said I would go. No argument, no resistance, just like always. But when I walked into my grandmother's house that night, something felt wrong. Not because it was dark, not because it was quiet, but because it was too quiet. I stepped into the living room and stopped. There was nothing there. Not nothing in the sense of empty space, but nothing where something should have been. The piano was gone. I stood there, my heart starting to race, scanning the room as if it might reappear if I looked hard enough. But it didn't. All that remained was a rectangular imprint on the rug. Like a scar. Like proof that something had been there and had been taken away. I don't know how long I stood there. I just remember my hands shaking as I picked up my phone and called my mother. I asked where the piano was. She didn't answer directly. She told me to ask my father. I asked why it wasn't there. She sighed like I was being inconvenient and told me it was an adult matter. I told her it belonged to my grandmother. She cut me off and said my grandmother was in hospice, that I didn't need to worry about it. Then she hung up. No explanation. No hesitation. I stood in that room, and for the first time in years, I didn't just feel overlooked. I felt something was wrong. Deeply wrong. I didn't know exactly what yet, but I knew this wasn't where it ended. Because for the first time, I understood something clearly. If I stayed silent again, I wouldn't just lose a piano. I would lose something much bigger. I thought the worst part of that day was the piano disappearing. I was wrong. Because what was more unsettling wasn't what they did, but the way my grandmother had already expected it. The next morning, I returned to the hospice earlier than usual. I hadn't slept. Not exactly from worry, but because that empty space in the living room kept replaying in my mind. It wasn't just where the piano used to be. It felt like a question I could no longer ignore. When I walked in, she was already awake. The morning light touched her face gently. She looked weaker, but her eyes were still sharp. I told her the piano was gone. I had prepared for shock, for anger, for at least a question. But she simply exhaled slowly, as if confirming something she had already known. She said she had expected they might do that. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not surprise. Not confusion. Recognition. I reminded her that the piano was meant for me. She looked at me for a long time, then nodded. She said she had made that clear. I remembered that night, everyone at the table, her voice calm but firm, the decision spoken out loud. No one had argued. But no one had accepted it either. I asked her what she wanted me to do. For the first time, I wasn't avoiding the question. She held my hand and told me something I couldn't unhear. That nothing they took from me had been taken in a single moment. It had been happening slowly over years. And if I didn't stop it, it would never stop. I tried to push back, saying I didn't want to cause her more stress. She looked at me and asked what hurt her more. The truth being spoken, or me staying silent to protect people who had done wrong. I couldn't answer. Because I already knew. She told me I had always believed silence kept the peace, but sometimes silence only allows the wrong things to continue. That stayed with me. Heavy, quiet, undeniable. Then she asked me to tell her everything. And this time I did. I told her about the empty room, the call that ended too quickly, the way my mother dismissed it as something I didn't need to worry about. And then I told her something I hadn't planned to say. That my mother warned me not to tell her, that if anything happened, it would be my fault. The room went completely still. She didn't react with anger. She didn't react with shock. She just looked at me with absolute clarity. Then she asked for my phone. I gave it to her without hesitation. She found a number and called. I listened as it rang, each second stretching longer than it should. When someone answered, her voice changed. Steady, certain. She told him she didn't have much time. Then she mentioned Sunday, a birthday gathering, and said she wanted everything to happen there. There was a pause. Then the man said he would prepare. She ended the call and closed her eyes for a moment. I asked what she had just done. She looked at me and gave a small, almost quiet smile. She said she had simply stopped being silent. My heart started to race. I asked what would happen on Sunday. She didn't explain. She just told me to be there. And this time not to lower my head. When I left that room, something inside me was no longer confusion or pain. It was anticipation. Because for the first time, someone in my family wasn't just seeing the truth. They were preparing to reveal it. I thought after that call things would become clearer. At the very least, I thought I would understand what my grandmother was planning. But I didn't. The only thing I had was a feeling. That Sunday would not be like any day before. And everything leading up to it would only get worse. That night I didn't go straight home. I went back to her house again, the second time in 2 days. Not to take anything. Just to look again. To make sure I hadn't imagined it. The door was still unlocked. Nothing looked forced. Nothing looked broken. Except the living room. I stepped inside slowly, as if moving too fast would make the truth hit harder. And it was still there. The empty space. That rectangular imprint on the rug where the piano had stood for 30 years. It wasn't moved. It was taken. Without a word, without respect, without even a moment of acknowledgement. I sat down beside that space and placed my hand on the rug. Cold. Empty. I remembered the first time I touched those keys. I was 7, my fingers clumsy. My grandmother sitting behind me, not correcting me immediately, just telling me to feel first and let technique come later. No one in my family had ever spoken to me like that. No one believed I needed to feel anything. Only her. That piano was never just an object. It was the only place I didn't feel invisible. And now it was gone. Not because it had no value, but because I had no value in their eyes. That thought came clearly for the first time. No excuses. No denial. Just the truth. My phone vibrated. A message from Chloe. A photo. A silver Mercedes with a red ribbon and her smiling beside it. No explanation was needed. I looked at the screen, then back at the empty space. Everything connected on its own. $95,000. The piano. The car. It was no longer a suspicion. It was a pattern. I didn't call her back. Because I realized something important. They were never afraid of doing wrong. They were only afraid of being exposed. And if I reacted too soon, I would become the problem again. The sensitive one. The difficult one. The one who made things complicated. I had carried those labels long enough. This time I didn't want to repeat it. I stood up and walked around the house more carefully. The bookshelf was untouched. The photos were still there. Everything remained exactly as it was. Except the piano. That meant it wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. They knew exactly what they were taking. And why. I walked into my grandmother's study. Everything was neat, undisturbed. That was what unsettled me the most. Because it meant they didn't think they had done anything wrong. They weren't hiding. They believed they had the right. I opened a drawer without a clear reason. And that's when I saw it. A small stack of papers carefully clipped together. My name written on top. Olivia. In her handwriting. My heart started beating faster. I opened it. It wasn't a long letter. Just a copy of a document. Part of it was covered, but I could still read enough. Her name. Her signature. A date from 5 years ago. And a small note attached to the corner. The house has never left my hands. I read it again. And again. Not used to be. Not before. But never. A cold realization moved through me. My parents had never owned that house. Everything they built their authority on, everything they used to measure my worth, might never have been theirs at all. I stood there holding that paper. And for the first time I didn't feel smaller. Not because I had proof, but because I finally understood the structure behind everything. The system. And this time I wasn't going to stand outside of it. I folded the document carefully and placed it in my bag. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't ask questions. Because I remembered what she said. Sunday. Just be there. When I left the house, the feeling was different. I wasn't the one being left behind anymore. I was the one holding part of the truth. And I knew it was only the beginning. The next morning confirmed it. When I returned to the hospice, she was already awake. I told her about the piano. She wasn't surprised. She had expected it. She told me something I couldn't ignore. That nothing they took from me had been taken in a single moment. It had been happening for years. And if I didn't stop it, it would never stop. Then she made that call. Calm, direct, final. She didn't explain everything. She didn't need to. She just told me to come on Sunday. And not to lower my head this time. When I walked out of that room, I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't hurt in the same way. I was waiting. Because for the first time in my life, someone wasn't just seeing the truth. They were preparing to reveal it. And this time I was going to be there when it happened. I could have stayed silent. Like I always did. Kept everything in my head. Waited until Sunday. Let my grandmother speak for me. But that night, sitting alone in my small apartment holding that piece of paper, I realized something clearly. If I stayed silent again, then no matter what happened on Sunday, I would still be the same person. The one who stood in the background. The one who waited for someone else to speak. And this time, I didn't want that anymore. I stood up. I didn't overthink it. I didn't plan anything. It was just a decision. I drove to my parents' house. It was already dark, but the lights were still on. The door wasn't locked, like nothing ever needed to be hidden. The moment I stepped inside, I heard laughter from the living room. I stopped in the hallway, didn't walk in right away, just stood there, listening. My mother was complimenting the car. Chloe was laughing, talking about the Harrison family. And my father ended it with a sentence I had heard too many times. It was a worthwhile investment. Not a memory, not something meaningful, just a calculation. I walked in. No one heard me, no announcement. I just appeared. All three of them turned at the same time, a brief moment but enough for me to see everything. Chloe stood by the table, the car keys still in her hand. My mother was sitting, her wine glass not yet set down. My father stood near the window, the light reflecting on his face. No one spoke immediately. Then my mother broke the silence. Not concern, just irritation. I said I wanted to talk. My father asked what about. And I answered with 2 words. The piano. No hesitation, no avoidance. Chloe laughed, a familiar kind of laugh, light but dismissive. She acted like it wasn't even worth bringing up. I looked straight at her and said yes, that again. That moment changed something. Because for the first time I didn't step back. My father exhaled and said he sold it. I asked if he had asked my grandmother. He said she didn't need it anymore. I said she was still alive. The air in the room shifted, subtle, but undeniable. Chloe put the keys down. She said I was overreacting. I asked why. She said it was just a piano. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I asked, what is this car then? It wasn't really a question, it was an answer. Chloe frowned and said it was her future. I repeated it, your future. Then I said it was bought with our grandmother's past. No one spoke. The silence stretched longer this time. My mother set her glass down harder than before. She said I was crossing a line. I asked which line. The one where I'm not allowed to question something that was never theirs. My voice stayed calm, but every word was clear. My mother stood up. She said families have to make difficult decisions. I said I understood. I understood that no one asked my grandmother. I understood that they thought she didn't need to know. And I understood that they thought I wouldn't say anything. The room felt heavy. Chloe looked at my father, waiting for him to take control. Like always. And he did. He told me I wasn't going to say anything to her. Not a request. An order. I looked at him. For the first time, I didn't look away. I said I would. Just 3 words, but enough to stop everything. My mother lowered her voice. She started to say that if I told her and it caused stress. I didn't let her finish. I asked then what? That was the first moment she hesitated. Just a second, but enough. I said I wasn't the one who did something wrong, and I wasn't going to carry the responsibility for it anymore. Chloe shook her head. She said I was ruining everything. I said no, I was just not staying silent anymore. I turned and walked away. I didn't wait for a reaction. I didn't wait for an argument. Because I knew this wasn't the real confrontation. That would come on Sunday. I stepped outside, closed the door. Not hard, not angry. Just final. As I walked down the steps, I heard my father's voice behind me. He said I didn't understand what I was doing. I stopped. Didn't turn around. I just said one thing. For the first time, I understood perfectly. I got into my car, drove away. And this time, There was no guilt, no fear. Just one clear feeling. Everything had already started to change. And that Sunday would no longer be just about my grandmother. It would be about all of us. I thought the confrontation that night would make me feel lighter, as if once I said it out loud, everything would feel less heavy. But it didn't. On the drive home, the city looked the same. Streetlights, familiar turns, the steady rhythm of passing cars. Only one thing had changed. Me. I was no longer the person trying to keep everything smooth, no longer the one carefully choosing every word so no one would feel uncomfortable. I was the person who had just said something I had never dared to say in 28 years. And that both freed me and showed me something harder to accept. That if I went back to who I was before, everything I had just done would mean nothing. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was worried, but because my mind was too clear. Every word my grandmother had said, every look from my father, every reaction from my mother, every smile from Chloe. They all came together, like a picture I had never looked at long enough to understand. Until now. I sat on the floor leaning against the sofa, the paper my grandmother left, right in front of me. The house has never left my hands. I read it again, slowly. This time not to understand the meaning, but to understand the intention. If the house had never been theirs, then everything they built on it, everything they used to measure me, everything they used to decide who had more value, was never real. A thought formed clearly. Quiet, but impossible to ignore. They didn't just take the piano. They built their lives on something that was never theirs, and believed that gave them the right to everything else. Including me. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the one who had lost. I felt like I was standing on the right side of the truth. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was deciding what I would do next. I could wait until Sunday, let my grandmother handle everything, let the lawyer speak, let it all unfold without me. That was the old way, the safe way, the way I always chose. But this time, something in me refused. I stood up, walked to the table, picked up my phone. I didn't call my father. I didn't call my mother. I called someone else. A woman answered, professional calm. I asked for Harold Jennings. There was a pause when I said my name. Then she told me to hold. I stood there listening to the quiet music on the line, my heartbeat steady. Not fast, not slow. Just certain. Then his voice came through. He didn't ask questions. He said he assumed I already knew part of it. I told him I wanted to know the rest. There was a short silence. Then he asked where I was. I said home. He asked if I could come to his office the next morning. I said I could. He told me some things were better seen in person. No explanation. No details. Just a meeting. And I agreed. After I hung up, I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel anxious. I felt ready. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to lead my story. The next morning I woke up early. No alarm. The city was still quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists before everything starts moving again. I got dressed simply, not trying to impress, not trying to hide. Just myself. On the way to the office, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. She said we needed to talk. I looked at the screen. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, but because I no longer needed her permission to move forward. The office was on a quiet street. Not large, not flashy. But everything about it felt controlled. Precise. Organized. Nothing unnecessary. Like the man who worked there. He stood when I walked in, said my name like he had been expecting this moment. I thanked him for his time. He looked at me for a moment, not judging, just observing. Then he said my grandmother had been waiting for this day. One sentence. But enough. I wasn't the only one stepping into this. He sat down and opened a file. Then he turned it toward me. He asked if I knew who really owned the house. I looked down. My heart beat a little faster. But not from fear. From recognition. Because I knew, whatever answer came next would change everything. And this time, I was ready to hear it. I thought I was ready, that after everything that had happened, nothing could surprise me anymore. But when Harold pushed the file toward me, I realized something. Some truths don't shock you because they are unexpected. They shock you because they explain everything you have been questioning for years. Read, he said. His voice wasn't loud, not forceful, just certain. I looked down. The first page. A legal document. Owner name. Margaret Whitmore. Not my father, not my mother, not the Carter family. Just her. Alone. I read it again, slowly, word by word, as if reading too fast would make it disappear. There was no transfer, Harold said, no inheritance, no gift. I looked up. But they've lived there for more than 10 years. Yes. And they think it's their house. Harold nodded slightly. They don't just think that, he said. He paused for a moment. They act like it. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. But it was heavy. My grandmother let them live there, I asked. Voluntarily. Why? Harold didn't answer immediately. He folded his hands, looked at me. Have you ever wondered why she didn't intervene sooner? I didn't answer. Because I had wondered. Many times. She was observing, he said, for years. She wanted to see what her son would become when he believed everything already belonged to him. My fingers tightened slightly. Not out of anger. But because I understood. And he proved it, I said. Harold didn't respond. He simply turned to the next page. This is the second part, he said. I looked down. Another document, thicker, more complex. But one line stopped me. Trust agreement. A trust. Date established. 5 years ago. The same time as the document I had found. My heartbeat picked up. This is how your grandmother protected her assets, Harold said, in case, he paused for a second, of misconduct. Not a possibility. A precaution. I turned the page. Line by line. Not everything was easy to understand. But one part was clear. Sole beneficiary Olivia Carter. I stopped. Not because I didn't understand, but because I understood too well. I started, then stopped. Not because I didn't have words, but because there were too many. Harold didn't rush me. He gave me time. She did this before I asked. A long time ago. Before I knew. Before you thought you needed to know. The answer was precise. Almost cold. So the piano, I said. It's part of the trust, Harold nodded. That means. That means he interrupted, gently selling it was not legal. The air in the room shifted. This wasn't emotion anymore. This was fact. Clear, undeniable. If they don't return the money, I said. There will be legal consequences, Harold replied. No threat. No emotion. Just outcome. I sat there silent. But in my mind, everything was aligning. The car, the dinner, the way they spoke, the way they acted. All of it. Based on a false assumption. That they had the right. But they didn't. Not to the house, not to the assets. And not to me. Why me, I asked. Not out of doubt. But because I needed to hear it. Harold looked at me. For the first time, something in his expression softened. Because you're the only one who never took from her. One sentence. But enough. Enough to explain everything. What do? I asked. Right now, he said, nothing. I frowned slightly. Sunday, he continued. That's when everything is revealed. In front of everyone. I understood. Not just family, but the people my father always tried to impress. The people he used to define his worth. She wants to do it there, I asked. Harold nodded. She wants them to learn the lesson in front of the people they care about most. A brief silence. Then I asked, and me? Harold looked directly at me. You just need to show up. He paused. But this time, not as someone standing on the outside. I nodded. I didn't need to say anything. Because I understood. This wasn't just about my grandmother. Or the assets. It was a line. And this time, I wasn't standing behind it anymore. I stood up. Took the file. My hands steady. No hesitation. Just certain. As I stepped out of the office, the sunlight hit my eyes. Bright. But clear. Like everything now. No more confusion. No more doubt. Just one thing. Sunday. And I knew. It would be the day everything either collapsed or was finally seen. I thought that after leaving Harold's office, I would feel lighter, as if having answers would make everything clearer. But it didn't. The clearer things became, the heavier they felt. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew exactly what was about to happen. And once it did, none of us would be able to go back to who we were before. 2 days before the dinner, everything outside continued as normal. Too normal. Uncomfortably normal. I still went to work, still stood in front of my students, still corrected their fingers on the piano keys. I said the same things I always said. Slow down, listen more carefully, feel before you play. But in my mind, there was no music. Only images. The dinner, the living room, the empty space where the piano used to be. And the faces when the truth came out. On Saturday night, my mother called. I looked at the screen, didn't answer right away. Let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then I picked up. Her voice was different. Not cold, not sharp. Controlled. She asked if I was coming the next day. Not really a question, more like confirmation. I said I would. There was a pause, like she was choosing her words carefully. Then she told me not to cause trouble. Short, Clear. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. I told her I had no intention of causing trouble. And that was true. I didn't need to. The truth would do that on its own. She added that there would be important people there. Important. Again. Not family, not my grandmother. Image. I told her I understood. And this time, I really did. Not the way she meant, but in a way she had never considered. Sunday morning came faster than I expected. Soft light, cold air, the kind of morning that feels calm, just before everything changes. I stood in front of my closet. There weren't many options. But I didn't need many. I chose a dark blue dress. Simple. Clean. Not meant to stand out. Just enough to feel steady. Not to impress anyone. But to make sure I didn't shrink. I tied my hair back, put on the pearl earrings my grandmother gave me when I was 21. A small detail. But enough to remind me where I stood. And why. On the way there, my heart wasn't racing. No anxiety, no fear. Just focus. Clear. I parked a short distance away. Didn't go in immediately. Sat in the car, looked at the house. The house I had always believed was theirs. The house they used to measure me. The house that was never actually theirs. A strange feeling came over me. Not anger, not sadness. Distance. Like I was looking at a stage. And I knew the performance was about to end. I stepped out of the car. Walked to the door. Voices spilled out from inside. Laughter, glasses clinking. The sound of a perfect gathering. I opened the door and walked in. Around 30 people. Family, friends, business partners. The kind of people my father always tried to impress. The kind my mother wanted approval from. Everything was exactly as I expected. Carefully arranged, beautifully presented, warm on the surface. And in the middle of it all, an empty space. Where the piano used to be. They had placed a large plant there. An attempt to cover what couldn't be covered. But it only made it more obvious. I stood at the entrance for a moment. No one noticed at first. Then Chloe saw me. She called my name with a sweetness that didn't feel real. Her eyes scanned me, evaluating, comparing. Like always. I answered simply. My father approached. His smile, perfect. As if nothing had happened the night before. He said I came. I said I told him I would. He nodded. No mention, no apology, no explanation. Everything erased by silence. My mother stood nearby. Her eyes met mine for a second. Then moved away. No greeting. Just control. I walked further inside. Not rushing, not engaging. Just present. Then I saw him. Harold. Sitting in the corner, his briefcase beside him. Not talking to anyone, not blending in. Just waiting. He looked at me. Gave a small nod. Barely noticeable. But enough. I nodded back. No words needed. We both knew. This wasn't just a dinner. This was the moment before everything changed. And as I stood in that room, surrounded by laughter, by polite conversations, by carefully constructed appearances. I realized something. No one there knew where they were standing. But I did. And it only takes one person to know the truth for everything to begin. I thought the hardest moment would be when the truth was spoken. But I was wrong. The hardest moment is standing in a room full of people and watching everything continue as if nothing is wrong. Soft music played in the background. Glasses were refilled. Compliments floated through the air. A wonderful 60th birthday. You look no older than 50. Your family is so admirable. I stood near the window. Not participating, just observing. Those words were not false. They were just not real. My mother stood at the center, a striking red dress, a perfect smile. Every nod, every touch, carefully calculated. She was not enjoying the party. She was controlling it. My father was different. He moved constantly. Shaking hands, laughing, patting shoulders. A confident man, in a world he believed he controlled. But I knew. The ground beneath him was already cracking. Chloe stood outside near the Mercedes, pulling people over to see it. Laughter followed. The car is incredible. Your family is so generous. She really has a bright future. I stood at a distance, listening. And what bothered me most was not the praise. It was that they believed the story behind it. That it was a gift from my grandmother. That it was an investment in the future. No one knew. It was a lie. Smoothly told, carefully built. Olivia. I turned. Aunt Margaret. The only person in that room I trusted to notice something. She asked how my grandmother was. I told her she was tired, but still very aware. Her eyes moved across the room, then stopped at the empty space where the piano used to be. She asked where it was. A simple question. But enough to make my heart pause. I told her she should ask them. She looked at me for a moment, then turned toward my father. I watched her walk. Slow, certain. Part of me wanted to follow, to listen, to witness. But I didn't. Not yet. Because I knew this was not the moment. Not yet. I turned back to the window, took a slow breath, held my calm. And then I heard my father's voice. Could I have everyone's attention for a moment? The room quieted. Not completely, but enough. He stood in the center, glass in hand, that familiar smile. Confident, in control. He thanked everyone for coming. To celebrate my mother's 60th birthday. Applause followed. My mother smiled. Flawless. Then he said he had good news to share. My heartbeat slowed. Not faster, slower. As if time itself stretched. He spoke about Chloe, about her relationship with the Harrison family. He looked toward them. They nodded. Polite. But I noticed something. A shift. Small, but there. Then he paused. Built anticipation. And spoke again. He said they had prepared a special gift for Chloe's future. Everyone turned toward the door. The Mercedes, the red ribbon. Chloe beamed. And then he said it. That it was all thanks to my grandmother's generosity. That she had decided to sell the antique piano to invest in her granddaughter's future. One sentence. Smooth, perfect, and completely false. The room shifted. Not entirely. but enough. A few people exchanged glances. Quiet, but real. Someone called it wonderful, said our family truly cared about the next generation. I stood there, listening. No reaction. No interruption. Because I knew he was pushing himself further. Further. And the further he went, the harder the fall would be. I looked at Harold. Still seated. Still calm. Still waiting. His briefcase remained closed. But I knew it would open. Just not yet. Not yet. And then, through the applause, through the congratulations, through a night that looked perfect, a quiet voice cut through. Richard. Aunt Margaret. Not loud, but sharp enough. She asked him to explain something. The air shifted. Subtle, but undeniable. I turned my head. And for the first time that night, I saw it. A real crack. Not in the story, but in my father's eyes. And I knew this was where it began. I thought that moment would be loud, that there would be arguments, that someone would shout. But it didn't happen like that. It began with a simple question. Richard, can you explain something to me? Aunt Margaret's voice wasn't loud, not aggressive, but enough to stop everything. The music was still playing, but no one heard it. Glasses were still in people's hands, but no one drank. The entire room shifted. Toward my father. He smiled. A reflex. Automatics. Margaret, this isn't the time. Just one question, she cut in. No raised voice, but no step back. Did you ask Eleanor before you sold the piano? The air froze. No one spoke. But everyone started listening. Really listening. My mother is in hospice, he said. She's not in a condition to. I saw her this morning, Margaret replied. A pause. She's completely lucid. People began exchanging glances. Subtle, but real. And she said. Margaret continued, you never asked her. The music faded into nothing. Only attention remained. My mother stepped in. Fast, controlled. Margaret, today is my birthday. That's exactly why I didn't want to do this, she said. But I can't pretend I don't know. Her voice didn't shake. But her hands tightened. My father looked around. Calculating, measuring. Still trying to control the room. This is a family matter, he said. We don't need. Actually, another voice interrupted. Low, clear. And completely out of place in a party like this. This is exactly the kind of matter that should be addressed publicly. I turned. Harold. He was already standing. His briefcase, open. And that alone made my heart beat harder. Not from fear, but because this was it. He walked to the center of the room. Unhurried, unshowy. Yet every gaze followed him. I apologize for the interruption, he said. But I was asked to be here today. A pause. In representation of Eleanor Whitmore, the way he said her name was different. Not part of a story, but a statement of authority. My father straightened. Who are you? He asked. But his voice was no longer steady. "Harold Jennings," he replied. "Eleanor's attorney for the past 30 years. A quiet shift passed through the room. Not understanding, but recognition. This was serious. "I think we should first clarify a small misunderstanding," Harold said. "A beat. This house," he raised a document, "does not belong to Richard and Diane Carter." Silence. No movement. Just stillness spreading outward. "It has never been transferred, never gifted, never left Eleanor Whitmore's ownership." Something cracked. Quietly. But irreversibly. My father stared at the paper. As if it shouldn't exist. "My parents have lived here for 10 years, someone whispered. "With permission," Harold said. "Not ownership." He placed the document down. People leaned in. No one said it out loud. But everyone wanted to see. And that is only the beginning. My heartbeat quickened. Clear, sharp. Harold opened another file. Thicker. 5 years ago, he said, Eleanor established a private trust to protect her assets in case of misconduct. Misconduct. The word landed heavily. No laughter now, no conversation. "This trust includes all her assets," he continued. "The house, financial accounts, and items of personal value." He paused. Looked toward the empty space. Where the piano once stood. Including the 1,892 Steinway piano. No explanation needed. Everyone understood. Chloe stepped back. Her grip tightening on the car keys. The sole beneficiary of this trust. Harold looked up. His gaze settled on me. "Es Olivia Carter." The room didn't explode. Not loudly. But it fractured. Whispers, sharp breaths. "What?" Chloe shook her head. "No, that's not possible." My father turned to me. For the first time, his eyes held something different. Not control. Fear. "What did you do?" he asked. I stood still. No step forward, no retreat. Nothing, I said. "She did all of this 5 years ago." Truth. Unavoidable. Harold continued. Steady. "The sale of the piano, without authorization from the trust, constitutes unlawful handling of assets." He looked directly at them. $95,000 must be repaid. Within 30 days. Clue broke. Tears. "The car," she whispered. "May need to be returned," Harold said. No emotion, no negotiation, just consequence. I glanced outside. The Mercedes was still there. The red ribbon still tied. But now, it wasn't a symbol of success. It was evidence of a mistake, of a system collapsing. And finally, Harold said. His voice slowed. "Regarding residents in this house, my mother almost lost her balance. My father said nothing. Eleanor requests a revised lease agreement. Or a pause. Termination of occupancy." No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. Everything was clear. I stood in the middle of that room. Not the center, but the point everything turned around. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't need to prove anything. Didn't need to argue. Didn't need to fight. I just had to stand there and let the truth do the rest. And I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of consequences. I thought, after the truth came out, everything would explode. That someone would yell, that arguments would break out, that someone would try to take control back. But no. What came after was heavier than all of that. Silence. A kind of silence, where no one knew where they were supposed to stand. No one left immediately. No one stepped forward. But the air had completely changed. The people who were laughing just minutes ago now stood apart, speaking softly, whispering. Not out of curiosity, but reevaluating. I saw Mr. Harrison, Daniel's father. The man my father had been trying to impress for months. He didn't say anything. He just looked at my father. A cold look. Not angry, but final. Then he turned to his son, said something quietly. Daniel nodded. And they walked out. No goodbye, no handshake, no explanation. Just leaving. A clear signal. I looked at my father. He saw them go. And for the first time, he didn't chase after them. Didn't call them back. Didn't try to fix it. He just stood there. As if he understood. Some things, once lost, cannot be pulled back. Chloe was still near the door. Eyes red, hands shaking. The car key was no longer something to show off. It was a weight. Dad, she said softly. No confidence left. What are we going to do? No one answered. My father didn't look at her. My mother didn't step in. For the first time, the chosen child had no answer. I saw it clearly. And what surprised me most was that I didn't feel satisfied. Just empty. Harold closed his file. No more words, no need. His job was done. He walked over to me, stopped. We'll finalize the legal process later, he said quietly. I nodded. Not because I understood everything, but because I knew the hardest part was over. Not the paperwork. The truth. Aunt Margaret came to me. She took my hand. Didn't say anything. Just squeezed it gently. Like that day, in the hospital. But this time, it wasn't comfort. It was confirmation. I wasn't alone anymore. People started leaving. No loud exits, no scenes. Just small groups, quiet steps, avoided eye contact. The party ended without anyone saying it. The birthday cake was untouched, the candles unlit. And the happy 60th birthday banner looked like a joke. My mother stood near the table. Not crying, not speaking. Just standing there. Looking down. No one left to impress, no one left to control. Only reality. My father remained in the center of the room. But he was no longer the center. Just a man who had lost something he believed was his. Chloe was outside. Maybe standing next to the car. Maybe looking at it. And seeing something completely different now. I stood there, in the middle of the room, watching everything, not needing to speak, not needing to act, just witnessing. And then, my father looked at me. For the first time that night, not with control, not with anger, but with something unfamiliar. Maybe realization, maybe loss. "Olivia," he began, then stopped. Didn't finish. And I understood. Not because I guessed, but because I didn't need to hear it anymore. Some words, when they come too late, no longer matter. I didn't walk toward him, didn't ask anything, didn't wait. I just nodded. Not to forgive, but to end it. I turned and walked out of that room. Not fast, not hesitant. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. And for the first time that night, I took a deep breath. Not out of relief, but because I knew everything had changed. Not just for them, but for me. And as I stepped down those stairs, I wasn't someone leaving a confrontation anymore. I was someone who had crossed a line that I would never return to. I thought, after that night, everything would be over. A clean break, a clear ending. But life doesn't work that way. It doesn't close. It simply shifts into something else. The days that followed were quiet. No loud confrontations, no dramatic apology. Just consequences. Silent, but very real. The news spread faster than I expected. Not online, but within the circles my father had spent years building. Calls, left unanswered. Meetings, quietly cancelled. The people who once shook his hand, now only nodded and walked past. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. Trust, once lost, cannot be bought back. Chloe returned the car. I wasn't there, but I heard about it. No laughter, no photos. Just a transaction. An object being returned. As if it had never meant anything. Daniel left soon after. No drama, no long explanations. Just distance. Enough to say everything. Chloe called me once. I looked at the screen. Didn't answer immediately. Not out of anger, but because I didn't know where I stood anymore. Eventually I picked up. Olivia. Her voice was smaller than I had ever known it. No sharpness, no confidence. I'm not calling to ask for anything. A Pause. I just wanted to say I understand now. I didn't respond right away. Understand what I asked. Why everything happened the way it did. A quiet exhale. I thought everything was mine, from the beginning. I closed my eyes. Not to avoid it, but to listen. But it wasn't, she continued. And maybe it never was. Silence. Not uncomfortable. Just real. If you don't want to talk, I understand, she said. But if there's ever a time. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I understood. Not a perfect apology, not a complete change. But a beginning. We can talk, I said, but it will take time. I know, she replied. For the first time, she wasn't asking for anything. We hung up. No goodbye. Just the end of a call. And maybe the start of something else. 3 weeks later, the hospital called. I knew why, before they spoke. I arrived early. The room was the same. Soft light, the faint scent of lavender. She was there. Weaker. But when she saw me, she smiled. You did well, she said. I took her hand. Gentle, but firm. You're the one who did everything I said. She shook her head. I only prepared. A pause. You chose. Shows. I understood. Not right or wrong, but choosing not to stay silent anymore. Do you regret it? She asked. I thought for a moment. Not long. No, I said. And it was the truth. Not because everything turned out well, but because I didn't lose myself anymore. She squeezed my hand. Weak, but still warm. That's enough. That night, she passed away. No noise, no pain. Just a quiet ending. But what she left behind was not the house, not the money, not the assets. It was a boundary, a clarity, and a version of me that I had never dared to become before. After the funeral, life continued. Slowly, but steadily. I moved into the house. Not because it was large, but because, for the first time, it was truly mine. I placed a new piano where the old one once stood. Not a Steinway. Not the same. But enough. Enough to begin again. In the evenings I played. Not for anyone, not to prove anything. Just because I wanted to. And sometimes, within those notes, I could still feel her. Not as a memory, but as something still present. A year later, things were not perfect. My family never returned to what it was, and I didn't want it to. Because what it was where I had disappeared. Now, I had something else. Not loud, not impressive, but real. I had a voice, I had boundaries, and I had myself. I stood by the window, looking out at the garden she once cared for. The evening light fell softly. Quiet. Still. I placed my hands on the keys. Played a short piece. Not perfect. But enough. I'm okay now, I whispered. I wasn't sure who I was saying it to. Maybe to her. Maybe to myself. But I knew. This time, I wasn't saying it to be heard. I was saying it because I believed it. And that was the real inheritance I received.